Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. We're running a couple of minutes late, so I will make sure that I'll try to keep to the time as best as possible. It's lovely to be here today, and especially to see some of the excellent friends and colleagues that I've known over several years, Professor Tillman, and of course, Jared. Thank you for organising this session and all the other supporters. I'm here to talk about aviation education assessment. A bit of a general topic, but just something I'd like to provoke some thoughts about. Think about how do we ensure we turn to the future and not the past? And that's where we're coming from now, because it's a fascinating time. Now, at the moment, I'm a professor and dean of doctoral research at the Deary University. Previous to this, I was at Capital as the dean there. And previous to that, I was at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and have been involved extensively with aviation for many years. I am glad to say that I've had the privilege to actually work in Kenya and various parts of Africa. And although I wouldn't call myself an expert, I would say that I'm very aware of the challenges that happen across the world and within the African and Kenyan areas. I have supervised 190 PhD students in my academic career. I've met some amazing researchers. One of them is Dr. Cam, who is actually the chief executive of Axiom Space. Now, they are a big leader there. One of my other students is one of the test pilots for Virgin Galactica. And what I'm trying to do today is pull together some of the research projects that have happened and some of the projects that are going to happen and the research findings that we have to add to the discussions that we have that we'll be looking for today. So let's think about what is the possible future for aviation. We hear a lot about zero aviation, zero carbon or green. Space is becoming an enormous influence and part of it, and aviation is now becoming aerospace. There are the global needs, there are advances in technology, and we are facing a wonderful future of so many changes, possibilities, and options. And at the beginning of this past, if we're looking about challenges for careers and things, there's never been a better time to start working in the aviation. But it's not going to be the same as it was. Now, a small comparison here. America has 350 million population, approximately. And it boasts that it has 450 international airports. Now, some of those are small international airports. Some of them are absolutely huge ones. Let's think of Africa. 160 international airports and a population, again, of about 1.3 billion. So we're not comparing like with like here. But if we were to turn the clock back a few years, 5 decades maybe, the number of airports and different things in America was probably similar to what it is in Africa. And parts of the world are time lagged and phase lagged with what's happened across the pond under the FAA umbrella. But we still have a global population of aviation. We still have identical needs, but we have unique needs. And this is where I want to be thinking about or provoking thought between yourselves. Now, aircraft will become more advanced in systems. If we look at some of the older aircraft that were flying in the 50s and even 60s, and we can compare that, the obvious thing is we now have glass cockpits. We don't have flight engineers, we don't have the navigators, we have two. Materials is completely different. The A350, the 787, hugely manufactured with composite materials. And these require their own needs and everything. Anyone who trained in terms of being an aircraft engineer 20 years ago would not even have been approaching composites or looking at these things. But now it's a core part of what is needed. And there's the equipment to support and analyze it. E2 engineers, they have a different type of role. And this is where we start to get the problem. You know, there are things that are non-repairable in aircraft. We just identify as a fact. But then look at the role of pilots. They will change, they will be replaced. The conflict in Ukraine has shown that fighter pilots are unlikely to be needed in the future. It will be unmanned vehicles. Now, once that happens in the military, this filters down to potentially cargo planes, aviation in terms of commercial pilots and the loading and different things. There is an enormous pressure in terms of how we deal with this technology. And this technology that we have needs to be maintained. The more complex a car, the more maintenance you have. The more complex an aircraft, the more maintenance and huge systems to support that. Let's not forget that we are in an industry with the best safety record of any industry in the world, and that will need to be maintained for it to move forward. Now, we do know countries will become a lot more successful. Africa is starting to boom. There are economic problems and challenges, but the money in the country and what is happening, and aviation is an enormous road ahead, which has lots of opportunities. Now, this brings in one of the things that we have, and we have a situation now where there are two main aircraft manufacturers globally. And to the lady that's here from de Havilland, Canada, I'm not ignoring that. Indeed, I did a lot of training at the old buildings where de Havilland set up their aircraft in Hatfield with the Comet. But it is controlled by Boeing and Airbus. And they have gone into situations where they look at hub and spoke aircraft to get people to a hub, and then smaller spokes to get people around. And the whole system has been designed by this. And the economics and the pressure of doing it is one of the reasons why the 380 is out of production now. Now, that model that suits America and suits Europe doesn't support Africa, and it doesn't really support China. And China is starting to enter the race in terms of dealing with aircraft to supply for commercial. Their equivalent of the A320 or 737 is now even on international routes between China and Singapore. And we know that the Chinese success and technology will expand. They will be a big competitor in challenging this hub and spoke system. And their model of moving people around China is ideal for Africa. And there are big parallels there. So you can see there being two main ideas of how aircraft are designed and built and then maintained, and how they are supported. And these are challenges that are coming around and we need to be considering. But there are more than that. More aircraft, more airports, more maintainers, more training, but also more problems. And if there's one thing we need to do is to learn from the past. And that is an important part that I believe that we need in terms of those that are involved and have an influence on what happens in the sector happen. Now, let me give you an example. When I was studying for my mathematics at school, we had something called log tables. We didn't have, and we weren't allowed, if you did have a calculator, to use them. And log tables are fabulous for actually doing long multiplications and divisions, but you don't need to know them now. And you go to EASA, you go to the CAA, students are taught logs, how to use different types of log systems. We have antiquated technology that we don't need to be using anymore. And we still incorporate that. And as a seasoned professor, I always joke, why do students have exams? And the simple answer is really because the professors who are in charge and at the front of the classroom now had exams, and they think this is what happens in the future. Everyone else should go through this. But this is what I challenge, and this is why I challenge it with assessment. Assessment needs to change. It needs to change for technology reasons. It needs to change to support the industry, and it needs to change to allow the industry to be successful. And if you allow me the luxury of putting in this Polybius, a very famous Greek philosopher who came up with the fact of history repeats itself. We had the deregulations of the American airline industries a couple of decades ago, and it was a disaster. And it was a disaster for all of them, the bankrupt airlines and the special Chapter 11 flying requirements and different things like this. When aviation tries to expand, the economics are enormous, and even more so now. This is why we need to be careful. There are many people who are going to retire in Europe and in North America. Not quite so many in the Far East and Africa, but there's going to be a void, there's going to be a vacuum. And one of the vacuums is the brain drain, where people will be taken from areas where there's not so much of a shortage and offered good money to go and work where there is a shortage. This will only hold back emerging markets. And these are the things that there now needs to be a constant stream of highly capable engineers of all levels and areas of expertise for home markets to grow and also to support the global market. So I see the needs for the future in several areas. The skill set needs refining. We need to actually take out parts of the courses and things that are not needed, and it is happening. For example, EASA, that's not the East African School of Aviation, but in Europe, have removed the need for essays in things like, legislation and human factors, but not everywhere. And the CAA in UK has not. We need to make sure that's consistent across, so that people are taught and they learn what is needed. Remote education and assessment is a huge challenge that we have. No longer should it be that you have to live near a large airport to get on one of the training courses. You can study, and I have PhD students who have studied remotely for their doctoral degrees and defended remotely with absolutely no quality risk to their education. Why is this not being explored? And this is one of the forces that we must be taking on to actually enable people to be trained more, which leads into assessment. Now, assessment can be a problem. There are problems with remote assessment, but there are ways that we can proctor exams. There are ways in education, which I'm involved with, how we can rewrite assessments, to stop copying, to stop plagiarism, to stop people using things like Course Hero to do it. And everyone talks about the challenges of AI and different things, but they're not such a vast challenge when we're doing skill set learning and when we're doing the educational side of the M6 classes, M11, M2, and different things like this. Don't let people say these are the reasons we can't do that. There are ways already, and there are ways that we can come across those, and they're very effective. We know what the problems are, and we have many solutions for a lot of these. The political will and the requirement to make those that change and make changes slowly needs to be done. Or we repeat the problem. We train everyone to work on the older type of aircraft that were there and not on the new ones. And I think this, and I'll try to start to wrap up to make sure we don't overrun, the big questions that is missed. And I'm going to go back to Jurassic Park from 30 years ago. And one of the characters was Ian Malcolm, Dr. Ian Malcolm, the mathematician who specialized in chaos. When everyone saw the dinosaurs, it was amazing and everyone was excited and self-congratulation. And it was only this person that challenged it and said it's wrong. Instead of asking the question, can we do it? We should ask the question, should we do it? We should be asking, what should we be doing to support careers of people that are in starting, early and mid-range of their careers, that they have the skill sets to meet what's happening and not making decisions that result in the same old problems that were happening. And so to try to conclude and pull this all together, there are many big questions. One of them, English, as from the Chicago summit in 1944, there's a case now that maybe we need bilingual education. Not everyone around the world is speaking English, and the ability to speak English and read all the manuals and all the feedback and now all the electronic training methods and different things. These are things that are going to hold back aviation. How do we ensure curriculum matches the aviation needs and not lags as now? Most of us here that have been in the industry for a few years can go and look at what we teach students now. And we're teaching them to repair planes that are in the past, not in the future. Space is a huge part. Africa rightly has its role in space. Any launch that goes from the equator, that goes eastward, is much more efficient and up to 6% more efficient. A bigger payload, a lower fuel capacity needed and different things. And these are things, and these will overlap with aviation. And in 20 years' time, some of you that might be trainee now may not be working on aviation in our sense that we're dealing with it, but also in the space. And space will mean manned and unmanned flight. Aviation will be unmanned flight. You know how in parts of the world where there's a natural disaster or flood, we don't need to fly planes in and look for somewhere to land. Helicopters can't travel far enough in some disasters. It's going to be unmanned. And maintaining unmanned is something that hasn't truly been looked at. and preventing AI from the influences in the assessment, allowing remote study and allowing not only remote study, but people to be able to study where they are and in a pattern that suits themselves. Too long have we been listening, you know, you must spend 8 hours in a classroom a day. It's tough learning 8 hours. We can split that up. We can split that across possible things. We have an opportunity in the future that is amazing. We are at the dawn of a new role, and these things here need to be done, and education must be leading this. It must be sitting at the top table, as I always say. Or we're going to limit people's opportunity, careers, and everything else around the world. Now, I'm going to stop now, and I've reached the official finish time. And oops. And if I go back here and say, look, I'm going to put my email in the chat and everything for people. If you've got any questions, please feel free to contact me and discuss these things. But I'm going to hand over to the next session now. And I have to say, I do a lot of presentations at conferences, and the pleasure and the delight of being at this conference, there really are some big players globally. For those of you who are here to watch and learn, you have a magnificent opportunity to hear the great and the good across the world. And I can only thank Jared for setting this all up. So if anyone's got any questions, I'll try to answer that. Otherwise, I'll let you coordinate and start the next session as well.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much. And I could never have enough of Ian anytime. Thank you so much. Professor, just to let you know, your slides were not moving, and I did not want to interrupt because of time constraints. Maybe if you could share the slides, we could post them later on to the audience just to go through.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm not sure what happened there. To the next author then, next presenter, and thank you. Okay,
and so we welcome now Madam Wandera, who will give us her perspective from HR. And then we will have Nitya, a renowned user, and then from there we'll go to Linda. So thank you, welcome.